There we go. All right, I think we have a critical mass to get going. So welcome everybody. It's the middle of May. Trying to remember the last time we actually got together. It's been a little while. So a lot has transpired since we were on the other side of the HIMSS event. Now we're on this side of it. It's been quite a whirlwind of activity and real concentration on this topic. And so I'm really glad that we're sort of got this on the calendar, and we'll be looking forward to kind of continuing these again now with even more purpose. So we'll just get started. I'm sure there's some other people who will join us. We're expecting a couple other folks. And so I'm going to just make, Christine, I'm going to make you the co-host as well, so you can, in case we need to do something here. Okay, there you go. Okay, great. So a couple of things, kind of the agenda for today. Since we haven't been here together, just a couple of minutes of intros and any new news, stuff like that. A couple of new people on the call here, which is exciting to think about. And then the bulk of the time we really want to spend going over what we did in Chicago at HIMSS. Kind of a quick overview of kind of some of the key parts of it, and then dive into 2 of the 5 breakout groups. So you'll see when we get into it, for those of you who weren't right there close to it, that we broke the whole group into 5 groups, and we spent most of the time back and forth in conversation. And so we're using these meetings now for the next couple of weeks to debrief those debriefs and to sort of sharpen up the edge of what was really poignant and important. And then we'll put that into a report. We'll do that at the next meeting. We'll look at a couple other ones. They're coming together nicely. And then we'll sort of wrap that all together into sort of an interim, like, here's where we're at, here's what the learning was. Because as you'll see when we get into this, the 5 sort of major areas we focused on, I think, are probably at least 80% of the topics we have to deal with when we're thinking about consent. And so there's a really interesting sort of body of knowledge that's happening. So one of the things we hope to do is to really more formalize some of the work groups, right? There were groups, we had an amazing group of folks there, and folks who were at the meeting will attest, hallelujah, that people showed up and they worked hard. It was really productive and prolific, so it was great. But the work has to continue. And the interesting part is there's already a trajectory over the remainder of the year with opportunities for us to present this. We're doing some work. A subset of Stewards of Change and Blue Path Health are doing a project with funded by the California Healthcare Foundation, which is to look at the same topic in California. Like, let's look at the best practices in California. And I'm sure we'll sort of bring stuff from part of the other country and sort of look at how that knowledge can shape the ongoing dialogue with CalAIM and the whole person care stuff that's happening across the state. Really exciting opportunity to think about consent. And I just saw on the website that we're actually live San Diego annual conference with Bill and Cami and company. So that was cool. So I'm gonna ask Bill to say just a few words about that in a second, because it's really exciting to sort of take the learning back and forth across the country over the years and embed it in San Diego. So Bill, let me just turn the mic over to you for a second.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's a little noisy here at my home. Just, I have some contractors here, but hopefully you can hear me. So I'm Bill York. I'm the CEO of 2-1 San Diego and Community Information Exchange, and I have one of our greatest leaders leading the CIA movement, Cami Christensen, is on the call with us today. Again, I am one of those people that felt it was an incredible, valuable learning lab that you did, Daniel. And so in coming away from that, and the deep level of work that we've been doing around consent in California for RCIE, but we also work with other like-minded CIEs and different networks from 211s to, again, people trying to create a CIE in this consent world. And again, we're deep in the in the connections from healthcare to social care is that we've been working on consent. And we even have been, looped into some, conversations around legislation and others. And so coming off the HIMSS conference, actually, you were a catalyst, and this group was a catalyst for us to have a segment and a panel at our CIE Summit, which is June 7th and 8th, where, again, we help cultivate, along with HealthMe's, a collaboration partner with sort of a think tank of sessions around CIE in the community, technology, again, real community examples of the programs and sort of what's coming and we see is coming, or different partners that are going to be presenting. One of the panels we're having is, can we come to a consensus on consent? And I've asked you, of course, Daniel, as well as others from both technology companies and Cal-AIM and Cambridge and other that are looking at their different types of consent to really, because I wanted to have a title, but they wouldn't let me have, can we come to a consensus on consent? And it was going to be no, but we just left it this way to really have, open up a large conversation to a larger group of people and bring this to the masses that will be attending from multiple sectors across the country to be able to hear some of our experts talking about where they see things going, the things that we've entered into at both HIMSS and some of the things that our own team is working on. So I'm really excited that we were able to kind of craft it. I will tell you, you were a catalyst, and the Sochi was for us to really kind of make a session specifically, or have a panel discussion with, it'll be, I think it might be a little, I think there'll be very differing points of views at that panel. And so I think that's part of what we're trying to bring, is the varied opinions around this and the varied points of view. So thanks for letting me give a little pitch to that.
Great, cool. And you put the URL and they can sign up for the conference too. Cami, why didn't you say hello? It's been a while since we did the work there. This is part of the introduction anyways. New people have to say who they are.
Yes, hello everyone. I have the pleasure of working with Bill at 201 San Diego and the Community Information Exchange. I unfortunately was not able to join the group at HIMSS, but have been in the Community Information Exchange space for a while. So it's nice to meet you all, and thanks for inviting us to the table.
Cool, thank you. And Sherabano,
Hello everyone, I'm Sherabano Akhtar. I'm a PhD student at University of South Carolina. My PhD studies in health policy and management. I worked with Daniel as a HIMSS investor for the HIMSS Chicago conference, and I'm happy to contribute in the development of the report. Thank you.
great. I think everybody else, Dr. Green, I don't know if you've joined us on the Wednesday calls, but you're going to be a speaker. So just say hello from beautiful Chicago.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
That's great. Thanks. Welcome. We'll hear more from you in a moment, as it were. And now we can challenge Sean's autopilot to introduce Sean, but I'm not sure that's going to work. What do you think? Nope, not smart enough yet. Still, humans won.
Just real quick, did anybody see the introduction to yesterday's congressional hearing on AI? So it just very quickly, because it speaks to what you were just joking about.
Yeah.
The senator, I'm lapsing on his name, from Connecticut, anyway, who was chairing the hearing, he said that here's what I have to say in my opening remarks. And his voice comes on, absolutely his voice, saying what he would have said, because he's got liberal politics, and the intro said all the right things about this hearing and his perspective on it. And then he told everyone that he didn't write one of those words and it wasn't his voice. It was all AI generated. The AI looked at his bio, at his speeches, at whatever, came up, and he told it to come up with an intro for this hearing, and it did, and it fed him, and it related it back in his voice. It was crazy.
Yeah, I saw it, and I just wanted to very quickly add, because I know we talk and are focused so much on consent in this group. There was clear bipartisan support for regulation of AI, including from IBM, OpenAI. They're all saying, regulate this, we know there are risks. And among the issues that obviously come up are who gets to see what kind of information and how is that information used. So the point is there might be impetus, there might be an ability to kind of leverage the attention that this issue is getting around OpenAI to bring funding for consent.
I'm not sure I would trust what Matt just said because he's already confessed in the chat that he is an AI.
No,
Exactly the point. Exactly the point.
We have Otter on the call, so we'll see. You know, it is beyond the 800-pound gorilla in the room that just sort of entered the room, just came into the tent in such force, almost as much as COVID did, in the sense of shocking people virtually, right? Having to get everybody on Zoom. That would have taken 25 years for, you know, our grandparents to be, you know, on Zoom, right? And just fluent with it. Now that combined with this will be a challenge that more, you know, the Health and Human Services is gonna have to deal with. Interoperability is gonna have to deal with it. And I don't know. I don't know if it's, I don't know if we're smart enough to really use the best parts of it without getting screwed by it, basically.
We're going to find out because it's going to get used. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
The rules are no rules.
Hopefully for the good. But, you know, that as we've talked about for the work on consent, that's got to be a part of it. That's got to be sort of a part of the conversation, and
Absolutely.
that needs to be considered because there's a lot of stuff we can do with NLP that can really be beneficial to having people really understand, and you can question them in different ways around their understanding of the consents and provide real specialized, I think, granular consent in a way that AI can really assist with. I guess the question are the protections. Well, with that in mind here, what we're going to do, I'm just going to run through about 7 or 8 slides, maybe a few more, just to give a overview of kind of what the day looked like in Chicago. And I also point out that I think I have that on the outline here. Yeah, so I'll put in the consent hub. This is important for people who want to engage with this work going forward. So there's a sort of an active hub that is easy to join, and all the materials from the conference are here already. So nothing was videoed really, but all of the written material is all here and is available. And we'll post the findings and the report and the distillation of that there. So there's good content to be building from. My sense is now, as I just put in the thing there. So my sense is that what we'll be able to do is really build on that body of knowledge that we've already been building on. Which damn slide show is it? And really make some progress around that area there. So anyways, that link is there as well. So let me just say, it was really interesting to participate in a HIMSS program as opposed to only being a guest. It's such a machine. And part of the goal of this work was to put this for at least 15 minutes in front of, you know, the HIMSS leadership to say, hey, consent is here. Kind of what SDOH did about 3 or 4 years ago, right? It was like, it's coming, and then it was all over HIMSS 2 years ago and then last year. Same way, I think consent is an important topic that needs to be embedded in the healthcare ecosystem because it's so big and so resourced, and they got to be at the table, but they don't only have to drive the ship. So anyway, we're in HIMSS, you know, we're part of it. Whether or not and how we participate with them moving forward is also interesting. I'll also call out that we got funding for this really last minute event through the State Health and Value Strategies Group, which is an RWJF funded group, kind of like the Network for Public Health Law. So RWJF sets up these national groups, and anyways, they were able to fund this work because it was really consistent and it was connected to the work in California. And Jonah Froelich from the state was able to participate, came out and joined us there, which was kind of cool. He brings a lot of experience to the table. So, so great. So let me just kind of go through the show these as slides, actually. It's easier for me. Okay, anyways, this is just, I think everybody's seen this one, or if not already. It's really our view of the whole person care, right? This is, think about the various segments. In the middle is the person, the family, the community. To accomplish that, and everybody's been on this road for a long time now, it's complicated to deliver the services one way, no less, across the pinwheel. But this is part of the language that we're creating. So a little bit of background on how we got to where we are is, at the beginning of COVID, we were ready to come out. We were going to do an event in Stanford on interoperability. We had it set up, and COVID happened, so we pivoted and did something virtually for about a year. Had a really good bunch of people from across the country participating in this, and the goal was, holy smokes, the sky is falling, right? This is COVID land. Who knows what's going to happen? What the world's going to look like? And so we posited to say, what's the world going to look like in a year? What's going to be important? How do we get ahead of the curve? Is there a way that we can contribute something meaningfully from our collaborative? And sure enough, people really put their shoulder into it in a big way, a really big way. And sure enough, we were able to distill out this idea of informed consent to share protected information. And I'd love to say this because it's obvious, but it's not obvious when you're thinking about interoperability and data sharing, and or privacy and confidentiality. It's just part of that soup. And what became really clear is it's really the front door, right? In my mind, it's the front door through which you got to go so that you can connect the data in a way that's trusted. And anyway, that whole idea of consent being part of, but also separate from all of the data sharing that had to happen behind, be able to separate those two things was really powerful. And I think galvanized people's thinking to say, hey, if we could address that, it has ubiquitous applications. Everybody's dealing with the issue. It's not solving cancer, but it is solving a problem and reducing friction in a system that has creates a lot of friction across all of the different areas. So it came out of that, and we wrote the paper on sort of promising practices, which we then we actually we finished the webinar. The NAA, National Action Agenda, and then for the next 6 months, what we did is we wrote this paper. We did a sort of a scan to say, if we want to do something, let's go out there and look across the country, make sure we're not duplicating, or what are the best practices? So that paper really was a group effort. So many people participated in it. I think they have 25 authors, who people actually contributed from across the spectrum. So it really represented the state of the art, at least a year and a half ago. And then what was interesting at Chicago at HIMSS is Stefan Konya from ONC was there, spoke for a while, which was great, very supportive. And one of the things he said was ONC had last year, or within the last year, sort of has been thinking about this as part of their discovery process, the e-discovery program that they held last summer. But they were going to do another scan, and they looked at this work and said, this is good enough. This is great. This really solves the problem for us. The good news is we looked at everything that ONC really wrote the last 10 years and incorporated it in. We did their work for them. But it really is still pretty good document of what the world looks like, at least circa 2022 or so. So that happened, and then we've been working since then to do some pilots to say, look, all this work is great and it's interesting, but we don't go do it some places. Who cares? Because you got to do it, and then you got to build the knowledge. You got to build the trust that you can actually do it. So that's when we started really bringing people together around this idea of a proof of concept, the idea of a utility, so that people could build off of a common framework, adjust it, modify it, customize it, and apply it, their laws and regulations, and just bring it in. So it's the chassis, right? Can you create a chassis so that other communities can build on, like the CIEs, like the work? This is what's exciting about stuff that Bill was talking about in San Diego and Hennepin and New York and other places, that people are really doing this work, but they're having to really create this consent mechanism by themselves. Super hard to do that. Anyway, so we've been talking about sort of kicking off the pilots. We're actually going to start working with Hennepin on homelessness and emergency room reduction. There's some folks from Hennepin on the call today. Jessica are here. We've been working in New York, in the Bronx, and I'm glad to see Kathy here. It's been a little while about working on early intervention to actually demonstrate the ability to do that. We've had conversations in other places. We've been in conversations with San Diego, both with Bill and with Nick and others, like, let's join this party. And so it looks like it could be good timing, especially with the stuff that California is doing around some of the projects around sort of a universal consent. So the pieces are all coming together in a really nice way in terms of being able to put some points on the board, right? Let's go do this in a few places, pick a use case, and then go with that. And we'll get into the use case in a second. So around that time, we started having the conversations with HIMSS, and all of a sudden the opportunity really opened itself up to say, well, what if we could actually bring people together around this topic, really consolidate our learning, and then use that to inform the pilots, the ones that are already in front of us and the ones that are, we know that we don't know, but we know that are in the process of working. So this idea of a learning lab sort of sprouted, and we were able to secure some funding to actually go do this work. And our goal was to really identify an audacious, actionable policy recommendation. What could we actually do that would support this going broadly? Something that would really matter. Building on the prior work, what could it be? Let's get the people together who know this stuff, ultimately to support, cross-silo data sharing, and begin to create a body of knowledge. The reasons why we need to do this obviously are there's so many of them, and we've talked about many of them. We'll talk more about them, but it's obvious that there's a tremendous need for this. And longer term, you can see a couple of the points on here. We want to inform the pilot sites. We want to elevate this for not only HIPAA, but non-HIPAA entities broadly. And we want to establish these work groups that I talked about, disseminate the learning and support this kind of, get this working so people aren't having to carry this load by themselves. And so that really was what we attempted to do at the event. And what I'm going to do now, I got a few more slides. I'm going to just take you through kind of what the structure of the day was. And then we're going to hear from two of the groups, equity group and our technology folks, to talk about it. And we'll hopefully, as questions come up or comments or whatever, we can just engage in the conversation. We should have time to do that. Let me pause for a second and just see if there's anybody want to add anything to that. Questions, responses right away. Feel free to dive in, especially folks who were there. Okay, so let me just go forward here. So we had an ambitious day. We had actually a coffee hour before, which was great. There were 60 people in the room, did some opening remarks, and then had 5 really quick sort of Ignite sessions. So Dr. Green, Chris, Brian, Dr. McCoy, and Sue Feldman really gave like a 6-7 minute, like, here's what we're talking about relative to the 5 areas. Introduce themselves, and they were each of them were moderators of the groups coming up, plus another 10 people who were moderators. So the groups were really well moderated and supported with scribes. And we took a break, we came back, and the groups then had their first sort of hour plus session to sort of address these issues. People took a break, we came back, and then for the remainder of the time, we kind of presented back and forth some of the ideas that popped up. And people could get some feedback, they could hear what other people were thinking about, etc. And so that's what that was the structure of the day. There's 2 concepts that are important that we wanted to sort of set the bar on. One was, there's really at this point sort of 3 areas for sharing protected information. The part that we're most interested in, as well as non-HIPAA entities. We know the healthcare entities and the HIPAA covered entities, complicated, big, challenging. That's happening. Our focus is on bringing social care into the conversation. And that there's different kinds of consents needed by different organizations, which was, again, one of a recent finding that was just clarifying the way we think about this. This is not the final. I'm sure there's lots of nuances that can be put to this, but the idea that, if you're a research organization, or you're determining eligibility, or if you're a referral organization, or you're a public health organization, you have different needs. And just being able to sort of visualize that when you say consent doesn't mean, your tomato is not my tomato necessarily, one might say. It really needs definition around what that is and standardization. And I think that's one of the things we heard. People want standardization of definitions from the federal government, from the state government, even from the local government, because there's too much variability. Anyways, but these are the sort of the conceptual models. I like to say that we can stop admiring the problem, right? We know it's complex. We know that the processes aren't user friendly. It's paper based. There's not standards. Et cetera, et cetera. And the last point here is cross domain consent is nobody's job, right? It's nobody's job. It's the interstitial tissue. So everybody says, yeah, we got to do this. We got to do this, but it doesn't have a job title next to it. So consequently, people have to sort of figure out how they're going to do this and reach across the boundary, which is super difficult to do, especially in government organizations. It's actually prohibited in some places to do that. So it's complicated. We recognize that, but that doesn't mean we can't do stuff. So what that means is we started to break the problem apart. As I said, we broke into these 5 groups. We introduced both in the pre-meeting material, several documents that we've written that you've heard us speak about. But one of them is the Thompson family, because one of the things we wanted to do is we really want to create the use cases, the various use cases, so that we can know what it is we're talking about when we talk to our own staff, but also across the boundaries. So the Thompson family has been in development for a while now, and each of the scenario includes multiple personas, and those personas have lots of different use cases attached to them. So we sort of set that up to say, look at this family, this really complex deep end family, and think about what's going on in the family. How many systems are they touching? What's it like to be a member there? What are their obstacles? They're really grounding this, as one might say, in human-centered design. And this is available in some excruciating detail. These links here provide a narrative, and there's also a lot of work that's been done on actually documenting the use cases in a catalog. And Brian's really been taking the lead on that for the last year or so with many other people. So there's a whole body of knowledge up here. Again, we build this course, we build the seminar as a 301 level course. We weren't coming into this to say, let's talk about the issue from the start. Let's figure out, let's jump in, see what we can do. So there was an expectation that people will be reading and coming to the table prepared. And then the work itself took place on one page, really. This is the page that we asked people to think about. After they read the case study, they read it, hopefully they started talking to each other. So, what's the obstacle that the Thompson family is facing, or one individual? How can it be improved? What's something policy related that could actually have a substantive effect? That was the context of the conversation we were having. And the idea was that these got filled out. There's all sorts of detail, and those are now being distilled down, the findings from that. And those will become the paper, as I mentioned. Now, what we did find, what I think we found is this really needs 3 days of time to actually do this exercise, because people start at the top of the funnel, and it takes a while to get down to a specific use case and a specific individual with their specific issues that are addressing specific programs and agencies. And so I recognize that, I was hoping that we could get there farther faster, but I recognize that it's hard to do that in just 4 or 5 hours. So I see this as part of the ongoing work, is we can now take the initial work and continue to distill it down so that it becomes useful in those proof of concept sites, right? So whether or not it's New York or Hennepin or San Diego or Colorado or wherever, we've got a set of use cases. We know what we're talking about. We know sort of the areas that we're looking at, and we're thinking about some of the policy related things that could potentially be changed. I made this one up, for my prerogative. I looked at this and I was thinking about how specific could you make it, and without getting into the details of it here, you can tie it back to the young, the young man and the family, Jameson. and the access of information so that, the school nurse can receive information from the healthcare provider. What does that look like? So you've got HIPAA and FERPA. And we had people in the room, I'm really proud to say, from US Department of Education, who are super interested in this. There's at the legislative level in California, there's interest across all of the legislative bodies around that, including education. So there's a lot of interest, and I should have said that up front, from federal agencies, not only the Office of National Coordinator and the Administration for Children and Families and CMS, and other places, hopefully USDA and the like, who want to they recognize the barriers and they know that they want to make change. So anyways, I've been sharing this a bit in terms of providing, sort of a guidepost. The next steps would be, okay, so what does that mean to align HIPAA and FERPA? Well, we have colleagues in California who've been doing that for the last 20 years. So there's stuff to be learned there. Maybe it requires, some new legislation or a different interpretation. So we're trying to get to the point where you can actually make this useful and usable, and it becomes a training tool. Yet another point that came up in a couple of the groups was, even if you've got a good application, a good solution, how in the heck are you going to train this across a whole county or a whole state or a whole region? So you really need to start with the end in mind, and training becomes a big part of that. All right. We have now going to pivot to asking to the two groups who are participating in this, Lisa and Pooja, who are both on the call, and then and Christine and Bill, who are also weighed in on this as well. And then we'll switch to the technology side. So we'll maybe spend about maybe 15, 20 minutes on each. And so we kind of target 5:15 or so to sort of be able to break sometime between 5:15 and 5:30. So with that, I know this has not been rehearsed, so there are some slides here. We did have a conversation earlier in the week. So I would open it to, actually, Lisa, if you would talk a little bit about the work in Chicago that you're doing. We heard a little bit about from Bill in San Diego. And just to set up the context for how you saw the conference. And then what I have is I took from our conversation the slides about the opportunities and then the recommendations from the conversation we had earlier. So we can use those as backdrop. So if you want to
Sure.
say hello, that'd be great.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm working from home this afternoon, and I have a puppy who's driving me nuts right now. So let me apologize. And I'm trying to get him situated. It's supposed to be my kid's dog, and somehow it has ended up mine. But
surprise, surprise.
I know, right? Oh my
First
God.
time in history.
My God. So yes, so I am happy to be on the call. Again, I am Dr. Lisa Green. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Family Christian Health Center. We are a fairly qualified health center that's located in the south side of Chicago. Give me 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Pooja, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Pooja Babra, Point of Care Partners. So was involved with some of the early work that Daniel had shared on the report, but then also participated with Dr. Green, kind of facilitating the equity conversation at the HIMSS event. So good to see everyone.
Okay, good. Pooja, I'm back. So anyway, we are located, so I'll give you a little backdrop. So we are located in the southern suburbs of Chicago. So we're about 30 minutes from downtown. But where we're located, about 10 years ago, Chicago began to dismantle its housing projects. And so instead of moving them throughout the state, they end up sending a ton of people to the Southland area of Chicago. And so there was no infrastructure to support that. So it was like, so these communities who had been disrupted were all then built into and infused with another kind of middle-class working communities that had been there. And so the volume just began to grow and expand here in Chicago. with that and not having a certain infrastructure in place, as an FQHC, we began to really kind of boots on the ground, begin the work and expanding our community outreach. We had an opportunity with COVID to really take advantage of that, over the trust that we've built up over the, the last 20 years or so, because we've been there for about 23 years. We do primary care, we do dental, we do behavioral health. And then during COVID, we opened up the first Black maternal child health ecosystem that has high-risk maternal fetal medicine on site to take out and to remove some of the barriers that we know are contributing to the disparities of Black maternal child health across the country, but especially in certain communities. That being said, I used to tell everybody I was the worst person EIT. I didn't know what the IT, I didn't know the difference between a right click and a left click years ago. So we were one of the first FQHCs here to use electronic medical records. Well, in the middle of COVID, we had always hosted ourselves. And so we took everything off-prem and moved it to the Assure environment. And part of the reasons that we did that is that we wanted to begin to actually, what we were talking about earlier, play in the AI space, right? And so in order to do that, we had to upgrade our systems and move things to that next level. And so by the growth and the patients that we took care of, one of the major challenges that we really had, with COVID is that you had people who were really sick, people who were afraid, and then those that came out had so many entities of care. And one of the challenges was just getting a consent, because we weren't in the clinic. We took it to, we took the clinic out to the community. So through mobile vans and pop-ups and things like that. And so we found it such a challenge to get consents for people, and then finding information out if they got behavioral health here, if they have been seen in the emergency room there. And so, because you couldn't just give a COVID vaccine when you're checking and the patient all of a sudden feels lightheaded and you haven't even given them a shot, and you find out that their blood pressure is 200 over 130 and they haven't taken medicine in the last month. So it became an all hands on deck trying to meet the needs of the community. And so it was such a struggle and an obstacle that we saw in doing care. And so we began to really try to figure out, okay, how can we, go around this besides, taking the limited manpower that we have, we can call in, getting information and things like that. So when I was approached and had conversations with some people from Blue Cross, and then was introduced to Daniel and found out this work that was being done, I was like, amazing, right? Because this would actually help solve so many of the problems that we have, out in the community when you're trying to get together all the different modalities of care, but you can't really make that diagnosis a lot of times just on like what's in front of you, because sometimes that care doesn't begin just there. So that all these other loops and network that we have to access to get a full picture. And so when we came to the HIMSS conference, the conversation was amazing. It was people from, everybody has a different lens and background. And then how do we move this forward, right? So what are some of the concerns that we talk about? We talked about the risk. We talked about trust. We talked about the ability to educate providers. We talked about ability to educate the consumers, because we can create something as a team and think that this is the great vehicle and tool, right? And we've ticked and tied it, but a lot of times you still need that lens of the end user who's going to be using that information, who we're getting the information from. And because there is such a climate, if you want to say, of concern, of, the distrust that actually exists. And I think, it may have been a nature of what we had before as a country, but we've now introduced, Twitter, social media, and all of these other accounts. So the ability to now vocalize that and share information, just not here, but globally, is also impacting people and how they trust one another. If you think about, look at the vaccine, do I get it? Do I not? Who do I trust? Do I mask? Do I not? So imagine that these are the people that we're working to be able to get their data, right? So that we can all be able to help move us as a country, right? Community, state by state. And so I think part of the conversation that I think was another part that was really good is that everybody was able to give from their space, whether they were working in behavioral health, Bill in San Diego, the work that have been done there, all across the country. And I think what was really echoed was the fact that if we're able to also do this, and then it's something that's replicated and we can scale it, and then it becomes a national platform, how much easier, right, it makes life for all of us. So I think that what we realized in the discussion also was how fast the time went. We had no idea that as everybody started, gelling in and communicating, how important and dear to heart this is, and how there is a momentum there to want to get this solved. Pooja, you want to add anything else?
No, I think you did a great job of summarizing. I don't think I have anything else to add.
So, one of the I think interesting things we talk about is trust, right?
Yep.
And that's a theme that it's so important, and yet it runs through all of the various groups, right? I think I heard that I always hear that, and I think I heard that in a lot of places. But how do you do that, right? I think Lisa, you said build trust, you earn trust, right?
Right. So we brought up in the group when we were there is that there was a program, and it's not just African-American, it could be women, it could be, there's so many different groups, right, that are impacted, right? Because that's what makes us the United States, is that, it's all of everybody, right? And so one program that came into mind was All of Us, which was a foundationally really good, solid program to encourage communities that have been left out of the table for research and things like that, to now have a lens that represents them, throughout the country. And they couldn't really get it over the finish line in our communities because with all this great work that has been put before it, people didn't trust it. We couldn't get the physicians couldn't trust it, didn't trust it. The medical assistants, the doc, was a draw, you draw your blood is drawn. And then it was a $25 gift card. And you saw the disparities where some people had no idea what they were signing up for. They needed the $25, so they got the gift card. You had other people who were, well, what are you going to do with this information and how far are you going to go back? And so I think that trust is a very valid point, just as we begin to build the mechanics of how a tool or system that we're going to use that we know will help us, navigate things better. We have to spend time in getting the voice of the people who are going to be the end users of it and I don't think that's always just in a survey. That's really, it's going to take a certain amount of engagement so that they begin to understand that. And that's why I mentioned to Daniel, it's not given, it's earned, right? And so whether that's through these conversations, and then the people who tell the story and help share it sometimes are not their same people, but they're the people that they go out to because now they have an understanding of it. And that's why we spend so much time talking about education, so that people from the end user to from the patients to those of us who will take that information to try to make things better for them. It's important on all of those levels that we ensure that the education is there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we talked a lot about kind of building these personas, right? Because then you start to trust. If you see people like you who are sharing their stories of, yes, I agreed to this and this was the reason, or, I didn't want to share this and this is the reason. So kind of building, right, these personas and these stories, to help build that trust, because I think that's kind of the ground, start at the ground floor, right? You need that, and then you can start spreading those in the community. So, I think that's kind of the basis to at least start to build that trust. So.
Right. I know for us at Fairly Qualified Health Centers, we do every year our UDS report. And our numbers used to be so low for obtaining information on, household income, sexual orientation, homelessness. And we thought it was just because the patients didn't want to ask. It was when we really surveyed and drilled down, it was the staff. They felt like that's too much information, Dr. Green. You don't need to know what their sexual orientation is. You don't need to know all this other stuff. And they just came in for a cold or they have hypertension. So they didn't even understand. So we had to go back and spend some time to our front desk staff, and helping them understand that. And then what in turn happened is our numbers began to grew up because they felt comfortable with asking the questions. Right. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we really echoed in, taking the time to build that trust.
One of the things I've heard in conversations with Arlington, Virginia. So Arlington has a universal consent that they've used, that they use and is available. We've shared that broadly. They've asked us to share. There actually is a video of them presenting the work they did. And the thing that stuck with me was through their community health workers, they introduced consent and trust through that human-to-human contact first, right? So as people come into their organization, or as they come into the church, or as they come wherever they're encountered, it's almost you have to create that human relationship first, especially if people are scared or just all the reasons you just said, Dr. Green. So I think we have to keep that in mind, that as we are thinking about this, automation and computable consent and all those things, great stuff. Yeah, you can move it, but somebody wants to take the form home. They want to talk to their, their family. Who else? Putting down the address and the phone number and how many people live in the family. How many people live in there. So I think there's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of known unknowns, as we might say, and there are probably some unknown unknowns that we're trying to work around. So actually, Brian, if you're on here, I know you're going to talk in a minute, but the one thing about the scenario and the personas and the use cases, so that you've got people on one side, and we're trying to simulate sort of how do you create systems to be able to support the interaction. So I know that you've been on the front line here with the Thompson family being adopted and utilized as part of the Gravity codes and service codes. Can you remind us again what that's about?
Specifically about them being adopted by Gravity?
Yeah.
Okay, the Gravity project has been underway since 2019 to initially define some healthcare codes for both scan surveys, conditions, treatments, interventions for social drivers or social determinants of health. With the intention of making it possible for the healthcare community to use these standard codes to be able to recognize when somebody has food insecurity and document it, housing insecurity, transportation, just 3 of about 18 different domains within SDOH that we're currently defining. In addition, the Gravity Project has been supporting the FIRE SDOH Clinical Care IG Implementers Guide, which has defined a mechanism using FHIR, FHIR, Fast Health Information Resources, to be able to exchange closed loop referrals between healthcare and presumably social care organizations in order to be able to get the services needed to satisfy some of these social determinants of health conditions like food insecurity. How does a healthcare practitioner request further assessment for or satisfaction of a particular observation they've recognized of somebody having potentially food insecurity? And along the way, we've also been working, and that includes, by the way, given that John Manning has made a comment. Those codes needed for us to be able to ask the right questions within formal surveys, formal questionnaires that often get presented by healthcare practitioners and social care practitioners to do an initial scan to find out whether screening to find out whether or not somebody has is likely to have a particular problem. In any case, there is a good deal of a good body of work that we've now done within the standards community for trying to make social drivers of health or social determinants of health part of the healthcare world. And in the last couple of years, we've also now been working within both HL7's Human and Social Services Working Group and within Direct Trust Information Exchange for Human Services Working Group on how do we extend those healthcare standards into the realm of social care. And I'll touch on that in a minute when I do my presentation. As part of all of this, we of course need to have hypothetical personas, hypothetical user stories. Under what circumstances is it important for us to be able to identify if somebody has food insecurity or housing insecurity, transportation, social isolation, etc. And that's where the Thompson family has become so important, because we started working with the Thompson family when the Gravity Project was still in nascent. It was still just thinking about how are we going to solve these problems. Yet we already had defined in 2018, 2019, Sarah Thompson and some of the first issues that Sarah Thompson was having. In 2019, John Thompson and some of the VA, DOD related issues that John had. And over the course of the years, growing out this, almost Stephen King-esque novella of all of the terrible and dire things we've done to the poor Thompson family. Not because we had anything against the Thompson family, they're hypothetical, they're fictional, but because we wanted to identify and highlight different kinds of problems that they were having. That included things like identifying that there was an extended family here that was living together, and extended households that were living together. And the ebb and flow of participants in families and households over time, as for instance, we broke up the Thompsons and gave them a divorce and sent John Thompson off to New York City to become homeless. This concept of family and household is so critical to the social care world, and yet it's hardly understood or even mentioned at all in the healthcare standards. So here's one of those situations where our contribution of the Thompson family personas, all 7 of them at this point, including John Thompson's parents, have contributed dramatically to the availability of personas and their background user stories for these personas to the Gravity Project. So now, instead of having 4 different patient personas in the Gravity Project, each one of them is just an individual in 4 different corners of the United States. We actually have a coherent family, extended family, with extended households that have moved from place to place. In any case, so that's the value of having had the Gravity Project accept and adopt the Thompson family as personas within the Gravity Project, is we now have within the Gravity Project and within all the connect-a-thons that we now do in the future around Gravity, this concept of family and household and the evolution of families and households over time as people come and go within those groups.
Cool.
Sorry for making that so long-winded.
Oh,
I didn't
quite
know how
eloquent,
much
quite eloquent, quite eloquent. It's soliloquy almost. That was great.
No Shakespeare am I.
Well, I think it just demonstrates.
Adam.
I think it demonstrates the not only the complexity but the continuity of the work, right? Because it is it is transpired, it's lived over a number of years, that the complexity of it can mature and then be utilized and modeled and used to model the reality out there. So
I'll throw in one more little tidbit. I believe that the Thompson family were the very first personas to actually be used to test the developing gravity codes when we did our proof of concepts back in 2020.
Right. And you got the award to show for it. So, so great. So we're going to take, you've probably seen the slides that are up here. These are a couple of just a distillation of the recommendations. And the one is this whole idea about trust and equity and having people understand what they're committing to or consenting to. So it's not coercive. How you do that, there's science around doing that. There's art and science to do that. So that's really the recommendation. We don't need to get into that right now, but as we go forward in our proof of concept sites, that's work that needs to get done. So before we turn back to Brian and talk a little bit about what the technology group talked about, I just want to open the floor again for anyone who has commentary on that or thoughts around how that might be shaped differently. I might say that the fourth bullet point down here, ONC should document and update pilot projects happening now. So in California, there's a project to try to test out a universal consent. It's early stages. It looks a lot like actually the Arlington, Virginia and other places, but it's the work of trying to get everything on 2 pages. So there's actually some good models that are happening out there, and some of the output and reports from those projects will be coming at us after probably July of this year. So we'll be able to learn from those. Lots of good stuff that's out there. All right, so let me now turn this over to back to Brian, and we've got just a few slides here to talk a little bit about what you guys found, and the context for technology is a little different than the other groups, just because it's been sort of our go-to point for quite a while here.
And I have notes, so I'm going to focus on the notes, see if I can get through this in a reasonable time frame.
Let's shoot for like 15 minutes, okay? Let's shoot for like 5:15.
Let's see if I can do it in less than that. Time.
Okay.
So the key points that we came up with are first off, social care needs standards-based interoperable data sharing within and across social care domains, and of course between social care and healthcare domains. And it turns out that sharing social care information, as we're learning from these couple of social care oriented standards bodies that I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're learning that social care information and the sharing of it is truly different than sharing healthcare information, especially in the diversity of business processes, policies, required data, definition of the data, you know, for that matter, the different definitions of the same data across multiple different jurisdictions. And often that's defined by enabling congressional legislation, federal administration regulations, and even state regulations, all of which can affect the business processes, policies, and the required data that needs to be used and collected for various social care services. And that's a bit of a fly in the ointment when it comes to trying to simply adopt, for instance, as some have suggested, healthcare standards as they exist. That's not to say that those healthcare standards aren't, however, useful and viable. We just need to take a look at, for instance, those standards, models, guides, both for information exchange in general and for consent utility models. Here we're on bullet 3, so that we can enable communities, jurisdictions, as it says on the screen, to readily replicate and customize consent solutions and exchange solutions for their local needs. There is work happening right now, final bullet, to roll out consent services in various jurisdictions based on various implementations and standards and some non-standard approaches to consent. And we need national level guidance and investment to minimize duplication and ensure the necessary cross-domain focus that supports both healthcare and social care and all of the little subdomains within social care. Next slide. So the opportunities that we've identified are, and with some, of course, duplication here, to extend and leverage privacy and consent standards across being defined within the healthcare standards development organizations, in hopes of being able to extend those healthcare IT standards into social care. And that will require some changes or some extensions, additions to those standards in order to truly reflect the reality within social care that is different in many cases than within healthcare. The second item is we need to extend and leverage existing open source implementations of consent service utilities, and there are a couple of them that are based on those existing standards and extend them to support the extended standards, the new rules and requirements, for instance, associated with social care that may be different from the healthcare rules and standards that these open source implementations were originally built on top of. Third is to demonstrate, once we have those standards, extended standards, and extended open source implementations, use those implementations to demonstrate. Here we're into the proof of concept demonstration world, to demonstrate how those can be used to either solve problems within and between social care and healthcare, or to highlight the next set of hoops, the next set of road bumps we need to clear in order to create a useful consent service utility. And note that I'm pointing out that what we come up with isn't necessarily going to be the be-all and end-all solution for everything. But if we get something in place that can then show us where we need to do more work to really solve the problem, we have moved the ball further down the field. And I'm not a sports guy, so forgive me for using a sports metaphor. Finally, this technology that we may be specifying and developing does not live in isolation. We are dependent upon the insights and requirements of governance and organizational development, legal, interagency systems and administration, equity, and likely other aspects of this problem that we have not even thought about yet, that will evolve over the course of the coming year or three. Next slide. I'm going to, Daniel, unless you really want me to do this, I'm going to skip over this and just point out that our little technology group of subject matter experts came up with some specific things that we know we need to do within the standards world, but I don't think we need to belabor it here. These are all things that are either have been discussed within the HL7 Human and Social Services Working Group or within the ICFIS, the Information Exchange for Human Services consensus body. So we will continue to work on those. We'll get it right. I promise. At least we'll try. Finally, our policies and next steps recommendations. Well, there are some things that federal and state governments, and for that matter, some non-governmental organizations can do to help out. First off, require the use of the standards like HL7 fire consent or HL7 CCDA and fire data segmentation for privacy standards in notices of funding opportunities, in basically RFP for any federal or state projects. Let's make consent a cornerstone of any future investment that the federal and state governments make in social care and health care systems. Let's just make it a requirement. If it's a requirement, people will have to implement to it. That means people will have to make use of, for instance, the standards, which is number 3 here, ONC reinvestment to extend consent and data segmentation for privacy standards to meet the potentially more sophisticated requirements of social care, in addition to their current focus on healthcare. And we also need to get number 2 here is improve congressional or health and human services regulations to clarify social care sharing and resharing, and of course, to put teeth into enforcement of privacy and consent for healthcare to social care sharing, and in all likelihood, in the not so distant future, social care to social care sharing and social care to healthcare sharing. Just because we do not yet have any laws that say that there is protected social care information, a la the protected healthcare information defined by HIPAA, doesn't mean that social care information is not, in many cases, very sensitive. So we should start thinking ahead to the day when we do have those kinds of laws saying such and such a piece of social care information shall not be exchanged unless there is specific consent to do so, such as a recent California legislation that's moving forward. Final comment.
It actually is, I think it's actually this week is being reviewed by the legislators around the adoption of it or the changes of it.
And final comment here is, you know, assuming we have the investment in the standards to extend them into the wonderful world of social care, we also need the reinvestment in these open source software implementations, such as the LEAP CDS consent service utility, or, you know, the consent to share that was originally created by SAMHSA, to extend them to support social care rules and social care enforcement services. So that's what we came up with at our particular table. It wasn't, as Daniel wanted, you know, just 1 or 2 basic ideas, but, you know, we've also been working on this for a few years now. And so we've ended up coming up with a bit more fine tuning of what we think technically needs to be done in order to make this a reality.
Cool.
What did I miss, Daniel? Having gotten this done in 10 minutes instead of 15.
Even better. No, I think, you know, for me, it's you know, knowing that they're even having the conversation around how much the work that has been going on for a few years in the demos and in the group, and embedding it in this wider, larger group of subject matter experts. I guess the question I have is, who else needs to be at the table that's not there, you know, or not, for that matter.
Yeah, I think other standards like user managed access.
User managed. Say more about that, Nancy.
Yeah, so that was originally a pilot started by ONC in around 2016, and it was basically the HEART standard, which was part of the computable consent, and much more secure than some of the other ways that are currently being implemented, in that the tokens travel with the payload, and it's a standardized way of sharing data. And, you know, if we really want to build trust, we need to, you know, really support it properly all the way through, so that, you know, if we're really not going to share the data without consent, we're not going to share the data without consent. Yeah. So it's just an extension of the computability of the consent.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think when we say health to social care, I'm hearing education, you know, waving their arms, and justice communities waving their arms and saying, wait, are we social care or are we different? Because, you know, one of the promising areas is education, as that may line up for us all the way to the federal level, you know, down to the state legislative level, and then down to the actual school district level, would be pretty interesting as a way to align FERPA and have those conversations. So I think we just need to think about that as we think about the regulatory environment.
I had an interesting conversation with Dan Chavez about what they did in California when I was lauding them with compliments about the consent work that was being done in California. He reminded me that the provisions that I was talking about only applied to the Medi-Cal population. So everybody, outside of Medi-Cal, they still, there's not like a single consent form to sign. It doesn't necessarily. So still much work to be done.
Yeah, well, that's the, I guess there's just a little bit of other information that I was so excited about. I term this, I'm cautiously optimistic because going into the HIMSS conference, and many of us spent a bunch of time sort of preparing for it. And just a couple of the points that really jump out at me. One was that, there's a bunch of waivers out there, sort of covering all of California. New York's about to, sort of dive into a massive whole person care initiative, basically, is SDOH. So it's coming. There's been multiple states that have been recently received those 1115 waivers, really pushing towards whole person care, which obviously, in order to make that successful, needs to have consent. In my conversations with CMS, Ed Dolly in particular, I think I heard him say, it's fundable. 90/10 funding is absolutely useful and usable and applicable here if it helps the Medicaid program, and heard this from state Medicaid folks as well. So there's a sustainability to the technology build, which is really exciting and interesting. And as I mentioned before the event or during the event, we spoke with the deputy counsel at HHS, Mark Greenberg, Administration for Children and Families was in attendance. We had folks from ONC and some of the accelerator sites. Everybody seems to say yes, and we've got the opportunity, we've got the ear of folks to be able to bring some of these ideas to the table. And I should include there now the U.S. Department of Education. Something's happened with the Executive Office of the President's Action Plan in the fall, probably. We participated in that, and there's materials on the site that include those recommendations. And then, what Brian just talked about from a technological and administrative perspective, a lot of good stuff going on that we'll hear about and be able to track going forward. We've got shovel-ready sites. Some are more shovel-ready than others, but this will be moving forward. We've got a series of webinars to help us continue to sort of share what's learning over the next 6 months, and to bring together the national cohort of people who really understand and get this stuff. So, we're moving forward on this next scan and the set of webinars. We're going to organize these work groups, and continue to advocate as best we can for national level focus on these key recommendations. That's where we are. I can't believe it's kind of here we are in the middle of May. We kind of projected where we might be, and here we are. So any floor is open for anyone who wants to say. There's some comments here in the chat. Christine, what were you? Oh, great. We're talking more with that. Yeah. So San Diego, I guess, Cammy or Bill, you guys have adopted the gravity codes already, right? That's super.
And are incorporating them into these 1115 waivers. So, but I had messaged Daniel that I had a meeting with Karis that was scheduled for Monday. It got pushed back to next Wednesday to go over that in more detail.
Yeah, I can speak to that. We were actually lucky to receive some related CalAIM funding. So there's been in California a few different streams, both locally through incentive-based payments through the health plans and through the state for cited to actually build out the Z codes within our community information exchange. So we've done that. And like I think Christine, you mentioned, a few of our staff are involved in Gravity, both Elena and Karis.
Awesome. So Robin, justice reentry. Oh, you're right. Is that part? That's not 1115. Is that 1115 as well?
Yeah, Daniel, just real quick, that's something the folks in California can speak to. They just were approved for a 90-day reach back in sometime in the last 6 months. My home state of Arizona put in for a 30-day one, and we're still waiting to see if it got approved, but there's like 12 to 15 other states that are doing that. And part of what we're doing at HMA is we're pretty heavily involved with helping folks with various levels of implementations around that. But you know, that ties into many topics. So, you know, the equity topic, the SDOH topic, housing, the housing piece of that is also a really big deal. And that too is all the housing supports that are rolling out in California. So it's all this big convergence of, you know, systemic good things where, you know, I want to understand more around what's going on with the 211 group. So I really appreciate them speaking up and being on the call, and to know about the effort that you're standing up in June, where I'm probably going to be able to learn a little bit more about what you guys are doing. So anyway, yes, justice reentry. I think that's another talking point for this.
Right. Okay.
I'd throw in one more next step, if I might do a little ad here, Daniel. And I'd like to maybe present on this in a couple of meetings that we are setting up have already started to set up a MELD sandbox for consent mediated social care referrals with the intent of
Brian, you broke up a little bit. Just take it right back to review, just MELD sandbox.
We're setting up a MELD sandbox.
Yeah.
For consent mediated social care referrals across extended referral networks, with the intention of supporting at least 3 fire endpoints, that is 3 fire servers, and at least 3 organizations. With the intention in the process of doing that, not only to show, ta-da, we can do at least some of this, but also to better understand what some of the challenges are of the edge cases for the work that we're doing within standards.
Cool.
And if there's time in a couple of meetings,
Yeah.
I don't want to get in the way of the next meeting, because, you know, that's our at least 2, if not 3 of our other tables that need to present. But I'm more than happy to do a presentation, including perhaps, if we have time, run the video of our very first demo that we gave at HIMSS on this very sandbox. And this, by the way, is with support of MyHIN and MELD, and we're working with them on potential additional capabilities as we roll this out over the coming 12 months.
That's awesome. If you have the link to that, I think it's in some of the papers. I don't know if you have the link to the to it. We might have.
Sure. I'll drop it in the chat.
Yeah, and I think it's on the website, on the hub site. So, great. Yes, the 5th annual. Wow, 5th annual. Time flies. All right. So there you go. Thanks, Brian. That's great. All right. So before we, I guess, let's see if there's anything else newsworthy to share. I don't think so. That's plenty. So yeah, so we're going to try to, I think what we're going to do is over the next, like every other week, barring sort of, I don't think we have any actually holidays. Let's see. June, July. No, I think we're probably good for the next month or so. We've got I think we'll have a nice cadence of this focus on this work, and, you know, be able to have another, you know, kind of go through the other 2 or 3. Bill will have a chance to sort of at least wave the flag a little bit in San Diego on some of this work, and then be able to take that across the webinars. And who knows, maybe I think I heard the ONC is putting out another an RFP or an RFI or an RFP on the next, on another grant. I think even Stefan mentioned that in the call, right? On another LEAP grant of some sort. So there's stuff happening. Hopefully we can engage folks in actually supporting the pilots. And that's the last point I wanted to make was, so we're starting to have some conversations with our, our friends and colleagues in Hennepin. And as I mentioned earlier, homelessness and emergency room utilization, improving that. And so one of the things that they're interested in is learning from others. Same way, San Diego and New York, everybody's interested in bringing to the table what they know, but they're curious about what they don't know. And so, a lot of places have been on this journey and have looking at it from a slightly different angle. So I don't know if Kathy, you're still on the phone here? It's been a little while. But working with Kathy and the Bronx Rio on really trying to understand how to fit that in there. Hey, Kathy, nice to see you. How you doing? Okay.
It took a minute to get off mute.
What's going on?
Not a lot at the moment. We're kind of very heavily focused on two other things that are going on right now with us. One is we're in the midst of a state certification survey process that we have to do in the next few weeks. And then we're also really heavily involved in statewide social drivers of health data collection specification development. Some of the folks on this call, we've just recently done a technical and functional and technical specs requirements document. And we can't move any forward with it or with how any of that relates to consent until New York State Medicaid and CMS finish their current negotiations about how the new 1115 waiver in the state will work. And there are a variety of consent models being tossed around, is my understanding, but they are not public yet. I have been personally trying to promote electronic consent collection of the type we've talked about in our utility discussions, but I'm hearing things bandied about like verbal consent that the social care provider writes down in their record, which scares the heck out of me. But I heard this morning that the state at least intends to try to get the negotiations finished and get all the documents executed with CMS on the waiver details by the end of May, beginning of June.
Wow.
At which point they'll be able to release at least some more detail about how any of this is going to work. And given that that is going to be where the state, focus is, we're kind of sort of putting ourselves on hold with consent until we hear what their model is going to look like. However, we have been able to get Gravity Project and Civitas folks connected directly with the people who are planning the social care needs survey process and data collection as of a week or so ago. So luckily the state came in through the New York eHealth Collaborative after we published our requirements document, came and said, hey, we're trying to figure out the fire IG and how we should think about this for social care surveys. And can you help us? And for potential procurement conflict of interest reasons, I can't personally participate in the discussions with the state, but because this project in New York State to get this moving has been selected as one of the 4 pilots for Civitas and Gravity Project's technical assistance project on implementation of Gravity terminology. We've connected the Gravity and Civitas expertise with the state and Medicaid planning folks. And so hopefully they will bring a lot of really good information and expertise to the table with the folks at the state who are planning this. So our whole thinking about consent is just really kind of up on hold until the waiver stuff gets finalized, because that's going to have to be one of our top priorities to implement whatever it is they say has to get implemented here.
Well, if it was easy, we wouldn't be trying to do it.
Yeah.
As it were. All right, so I was hoping you said that they've completed their 1115, but
It's according to someone from the state who was on a call with all of the HIEs in New York this morning. He said that their aim is to get it signed by June 1st. So hopefully they'll be on track for that or shortly thereafter. They're getting closer and closer. I mean, I keep hearing all sorts of semi-confirmed rumors about various things that they've finally agreed to or agreed to eliminate or agreed to do or whatever. So it's also unclear, the original outline for this in New York was that there would be 9 regions in the state, each of which would have a social care network that would, follow certain principles to collect, probably through the HIEs, the health-related social needs screenings, because they are going to probably most likely use the Accountable Healthcare Communities HRSN screening tool, or a part of it anyway. And that data would get routed to us and then to the social care networks from whoever it is who'll be collecting the screening information, and we don't know yet who that's going to go to. And so what we learned this morning, originally the state was saying there'd be 9 regions, each region with 1 SCN, social care network. I asked this morning if that was still the plan, and essentially was told that a lot of folks who wanted to be SCNs had been reaching out to the state, and that sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks, the state was going to be doing a procurement and putting out an RFP to get applications from folks to be SCNs, and that they'd have to see how those all shook out in terms of what the applicants' networks looked like before they could say if, for example, New York City would be just 1 region or might be several regions. So
really?
this, and I know a bunch of the players behind the scenes that are doing that lobbying. I firmly suspect that once we get the applications in and people start talking about things, that Staten Island may become its own region. And because of its geography, you can't really argue with that. And they had a strong, DISRIP group that has stayed together and continued to work together since the end of our DISRIP program in 2021. There are other networks. There's a huge IPA that's citywide that actually is a Bronx Rio member that we know has been lobbying with them. And so, we also know that, for example, the New York City Department of Health wants to perhaps join forces with a couple of other nonprofits to be a New York City-wide SCN. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this all shakes out. I'd personally rather be a completely objective observer writing a case study about this rather than a participant that is in the midst of the swirling waters. But, it is interesting to see how it all may play out over the next probably 6 months or so before we really know what's going on here.
Oh, write a grant and come on over. We got we can write the case study.
Oh yeah.
That's crazy. That sounds daunting, to say the least there. So
yeah, and it changes weekly. So it's like you think you understand one thing today, and next week it's like, oh no, it's not going to happen that way.
Yeah. That's wild. Is that a, you know, is 1115, is the 11, is that a 5-year waiver as well?
Yep.
It is, it's 5 years, okay.
Yep. And apparently some of the scuttlebutt I've heard is that New York is going to be the last waiver Medicaid approves for a while. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Till the
you know,
budget
they've
goes,
got-
till they depend whether there's any more money left.
Exactly. You know, they've got similar social care related waivers going on in several other states at the moment. So we're, you know, watching California and North Carolina, and, you know, everybody's a bit different with how folks are going about this.
Well, Oregon is interesting.
Oregon,
So
yep.
Arizona, Alabama, Massachusetts also got theirs approved as well. Cool. All right then, everyone. I think we are now into double overtime, so we've accomplished that again. So we will send out sort of a note to folks, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And many of you will talk to you tomorrow. So this was great. I'm glad we're back on. Hopefully it was a good use of time and people felt catching up with what we got going here. So with that, I'm gonna stop recording.